What if the person you love the most suddenly feels miles away, even when they're sitting next to you? Emily sat on the edge of the couch, wrapped in a thick blanket, staring at the gray skies outside her window. The rain fell steadily, tapping against the glass, but it didn't match the storm inside her heart. Lately, her marriage to Daniel felt like it existed on autopilot. They lived together, shared meals, and slept in the same bed, but the connection that had once been electric was gone. Conversations felt rushed or distracted, and even their smiles lacked warmth. Emily felt invisible, as though she were a ghost moving through her own life. Daniel worked long hours, and when he was home, he often buried himself in his phone or laptop. He apologized when Emily mentioned feeling lonely, but his apologies were quick, perfunctory, almost rehearsed. Emily couldn't tell if he understood the depth of her sadness. She missed laughter, intimacy, shared jokes, and the small touches that once made their relationship feel alive. The distance wasn't caused by anger or betrayal, it was slow, quiet, creeping in like a fog until it consumed their home. Could help come from someone she never expected. That morning, there was a gentle knock at the door. Emily opened it to find Margaret, Daniel's mother, standing there with a warm smile and a basket of freshly baked pastries. "I thought you could use some company," she said softly. Emily hesitated. She had never relied on her mother-in-law for emotional support before, but something about Margaret's calm presence felt soothing. She stepped aside, letting her in. Margaret set the basket on the table and poured them both a cup of coffee. She didn't immediately offer advice or try to fix anything. She simply asked Emily about her day, her feelings, and even what she wanted from life. Emily was surprised by how comforting it felt to be heard without judgment, to have someone ask simple questions and actually listen. The loneliness that had felt unbearable softened just a little. Daniel walked in, surprised to see his mother there, but he smiled and accepted her presence. Margaret's warmth seemed to reach him too. He laughed at a small joke Margaret made about the rainy weather, and for a moment, Emily noticed a spark in him she hadn't seen in weeks. Her heart softened, but a small ache remained. She realized that emotional closeness with someone else highlighted the distance she had felt from her husband. Can emotional support from another person be comforting and unsettling at the same time? Margaret stayed through breakfast, helping organize the kitchen and arranging fresh flowers on the counter. She suggested little changes that brightened the space: folded blankets, candles lit in the living room, and notes on the fridge with gentle reminders of care. Emily watched as Daniel interacted with his mother, his eyes lighting up as he shared stories, laughed at her jokes, and listened attentively. The scene was pleasant, but it also stirred a quiet jealousy Emily didn't expect. She wasn't threatened by her mother-in-law, but she realized how much she had been missing from her husband. Later that day, Margaret suggested that Emily take a break and read a book while she tidied up the living room. Emily felt hesitant at first, feeling guilty for stepping aside while Margaret managed her home. But as she sank into the armchair, blanket around her shoulders, she noticed how the apartment felt warmer, softer, and more welcoming. The presence of someone who cared, even quietly, made her feel less alone. How do you face loneliness when it lives inside your own home? That evening, Emily overheard Daniel and Margaret talking softly in the kitchen. "You work so hard," Margaret said. "Sometimes it feels like no one notices all that you do." "I know," Daniel replied. I don't want to burden anyone." Emily stepped back, holding her breath. There was no malice, no inappropriate tone, but the intimacy of their exchange was undeniable. Margaret had become a comforting presence, someone Daniel could lean on emotionally. It wasn't wrong, but it made Emily confront the reality of her own emotional absence in his life. She felt grateful for the support but also displaced, caught between relief for Daniel and the aching recognition that she had been neglected. That night, Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The sound of rain outside mirrored the heaviness she felt inside. She wondered how she had drifted so far from her husband, how small neglects had built walls between them, and whether it was possible to bridge the distance before it became permanent. Could their love survive the quiet drift, or had they already lost something precious? Emily realized that the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm in her heart. Margaret's presence had reminded her of what could be: warmth, attention, laughter, but also what had been missing for months. Emotional neglect doesn't leave bruises or visible scars, but it leaves a hollow ache, a gnawing fear that love can fade silently. As Emily closed her eyes, she thought about the days to come. Margaret's arrival had opened a door, a small chance to reconnect, to rebuild what had been lost, and to find warmth where there had been cold. But she also knew that the real work belonged to her and Daniel. External guidance could only do so much. They had to choose each other again, and yet, in the quiet of that night, Emily couldn't shake a lingering fear. What if the emotional drift had gone too far? What if love could not be restored? And what if the presence that now brought comfort also highlighted what had almost been lost forever? The rain continued to fall, soft and steady, as Emily held the blanket close, realizing that the journey to regain connection had only just begun, and that the next days would reveal whether warmth, attention, and love could truly return to her life. Can a stranger's kindness show you what you've been missing in your own life? The morning after Margaret's visit, Emily woke to a quiet apartment that felt slightly different. The air was lighter, almost warmer. She realized the change wasn't in the room, it was in her perception. The small gestures Margaret had left behind lingered. A folded blanket on the sofa, a steaming cup of coffee waiting on the counter, a simple note that read, "Take care of yourself today." Emily felt seen in a way she hadn't for months. It was strange and comforting, a reminder that care and attention weren't gone from her life, they had just been misplaced. Daniel entered the kitchen, bleary-eyed from a late night at work. Emily handed him the coffee Margaret had prepared. He smiled, genuinely, and for the first time in weeks, lingered in conversation without distractions. "I missed this," he said softly, looking around. Emily felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps the distance between them wasn't permanent. Perhaps, with patience, they could find each other again. Could guidance from someone else rebuild what had been lost? Margaret returned mid-morning with a bag of groceries and a warm, calm energy. She didn't speak of problems or criticize the couple, she simply helped, suggesting small adjustments. "Try adding a few flowers here," she said, placing a simple bouquet on the kitchen table. "It brightens the space and the mood." Emily watched Daniel's face light up as he arranged the flowers beside the window. The apartment, the home, felt alive again. And with it, Emily felt a subtle shift inside herself, a mix of gratitude and quiet longing. The afternoon passed with quiet productivity. Margaret encouraged Emily to take a short walk while she organized the pantry. As Emily stepped outside, the sun peeked through scattered clouds. She realized how heavy the emotional fog of the past months had been. Walking along the familiar streets, Emily noticed things she had overlooked: children laughing, neighbors waving, the gentle rustle of trees. These simple moments felt almost magical, and she understood that loneliness hadn't just been about the absence of Daniel's attention, it had been about losing connection to the world and to herself. Can someone else's attention remind you to cherish your own life? Returning home, Emily found Daniel sitting at the counter, flipping through a recipe book Margaret had left behind. She smiled as he looked up and offered her a taste of a new idea he was experimenting with. They cooked together, laughing as they fumbled over measurements and spilled flour on the counter. Margaret watched quietly from a corner, never intruding, simply letting them enjoy the process. It was in these moments, simple yet intimate, that Emily realized how important emotional support was. Margaret's presence had provided it without taking anything away. She had reminded Emily that warmth and care could still exist in her life, but that she needed to accept it and allow herself to feel it. Could the comfort she was receiving be mistaken for something else? As the evening approached, Emily noticed Daniel seeking Margaret's guidance for minor decisions. It was innocent, practical, and kind, but it stung in a way she hadn't expected. A small pang of jealousy cut through her heart. Not because she thought there was any wrongdoing, but because she felt like a bystander in her own marriage. Margaret's influence, though gentle and supportive, highlighted how much emotional distance had grown between Emily and Daniel. That night, Emily lay awake, thinking. The presence of someone who cared so openly made her feel comforted, yet it also reminded her of what had been missing in her own marriage. She understood that Margaret's role wasn't to replace her, it was to guide, to create a bridge. The question was whether Emily and Daniel would walk across it together. Could love be restored through small acts, or had they already drifted too far? The next day brought a shared sense of purpose. Daniel asked Emily to join him in organizing the living room. They moved furniture, dusted surfaces, and laughed over old memories hidden in books and photographs. The activity, mundane as it might have seemed, became a quiet reconnection. Emily noticed the spark in Daniel's eyes returning, a spark she hadn't seen in weeks. Her heart lifted. Margaret offered subtle guidance, suggesting small touches that brought warmth to the room without dominating the space. Sometimes a home needs a little color to match the heart inside, she said softly, placing a bright throw over the sofa. Emily realized she had forgotten how much small details mattered. Emotional presence, shared laughter, even attention to everyday chores, all these things mattered more than she had realized. Emotional closeness enough to heal what has been neglected. As evening fell, Emily and Daniel decided to bake cookies together. Margaret suggested a simple recipe, smiling as she watched them interact. Flour covered their hands, chocolate smeared on the counter, and laughter echoed through the apartment. Emily felt something she hadn't in months: joy, connection, intimacy in the simplest form. Daniel looked at her, his eyes soft, and said, "I forgot how much I enjoy this, being with you." Emily's chest tightened with emotion. This was what she had missed, the feeling of being noticed, valued, and truly present in someone's life. Margaret had created the space for it, but the responsibility to nurture it now lay with them. The evening ended with warmth, shared smiles, and a quiet understanding that the healing process had begun. Could they sustain this fragile reconnection, or was it temporary? Emily reflected on the day as she climbed into bed. Margaret's presence had been a catalyst, showing her the comfort and attention she had been missing, but it also reminded her of the emotional gap that had formed in her marriage. The nights had been lonely before, but now they had the promise of shared moments, of laughter, of rebuilding trust and intimacy. Yet Emily knew that hope was not a guarantee. The real challenge was maintaining the connection, keeping the warmth alive without relying solely on Margaret's guidance. The journey ahead would require effort, communication, and intentional acts of care. She realized that loneliness could be overcome, but only if both she and Daniel were willing to choose each other every day. The rain continued outside, soft and steady, while inside, a small light of hope glowed. Emily closed her eyes, thinking of the next day, the chance to reconnect, to laugh, to rediscover the bond she and Daniel had almost lost. Margaret had shown the way, but the path belonged to them now. Could they find safety, warmth, and love in each other again? The question lingered in Emily's mind, a quiet suspense that carried the story forward. She knew the next days would test their willingness to bridge the distance, to face the loneliness, and to rediscover the life and love they had almost lost. But for the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of optimism. Something inside her whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, they could find each other again. Can love survive when it's almost been forgotten? The days after Margaret's visits carried a quiet but powerful shift. Emily noticed it first in the mornings. Daniel would linger in the kitchen, sipping coffee while asking about her plans for the day. He paused to listen when she spoke, actually listening, not nodding absent-mindedly while scrolling his phone. Emily felt a flutter in her chest she hadn't felt in months. It was subtle, but it mattered. The emotional distance between them, which had once felt insurmountable, was beginning to close. Margaret's presence had created space for this change, but she never forced it. She quietly encouraged Emily to accept help, offered gentle suggestions, and then stepped back. The power wasn't in her actions, it was in allowing the couple to notice what they were missing and to begin reconnecting on their own. Emily realized that warmth didn't have to come from someone outside the marriage, it was already there, waiting for recognition. Could small moments bring back what seemed lost forever? One chilly afternoon, Emily suggested they tackle the pile of snow outside their apartment together. Daniel agreed, and the two of them bundled up and worked side by side. At first, it felt awkward, the long months of distance making simple cooperation feel strange. But soon, laughter replaced silence. They joked about slipping on icy patches and competing to see who could shovel the fastest. Emily felt the tension that had built up for months melting away, replaced by shared enjoyment and teamwork. When they returned inside, cheeks flushed and hands numb, Daniel pulled Emily close, wrapping a blanket around them both. "I forgot how much I love moments like this," he admitted softly. Emily smiled, her heart warming. The connection they had thought lost was slowly returning. Margaret, watching from a nearby chair, smiled knowingly. She understood the difference between forcing intimacy and allowing it to grow naturally. Can trust and emotional closeness be rebuilt one small step at a time? Evenings became their time to reconnect. Daniel suggested simple activities, cooking dinner together, watching a favorite TV show, or just talking over tea. Emily noticed that he no longer sought guidance from Margaret for every small decision. Instead, he would pause and ask for her thoughts first. Each question, each conversation, was a thread, slowly weaving the fabric of their relationship back together. Emily realized that love doesn't always return with grand gestures, often, it comes in these small, deliberate moments of attention. Margaret's role continued to be subtle. She offered advice when asked, but mostly she observed, quietly supporting the couple's autonomy. She understood that real change could only come from within their marriage. Emily felt gratitude for her mother-in-law but also a renewed sense of agency. The love she and Daniel were rediscovering was theirs alone. Could old habits of neglect undo the progress they were making? One night, as Emily prepared tea, she noticed Daniel pausing, looking at her with soft eyes. "I've missed this, just being present with you," he said. Emily's chest tightened with emotion. She realized that the loneliness she had felt was not permanent. It had been a signal, a warning that emotional attention was necessary. Now, with focus and effort, they were addressing it together. The couple also began revisiting small joys they had neglected. Baking cookies became a shared ritual. They laughed at flour-covered hands and chocolate-smeared counters. These moments reminded Emily of the playful side of their relationship, the side that had been buried under the weight of distance and routine. Every laugh, every glance, and every touch reinforced the bond they had feared losing. Could a couple maintain closeness without outside help? Emily realized that Margaret had only shown them the path. The true work, sustaining emotional intimacy, belonged to her and Daniel. They began creating routines that prioritized connection, shared breakfasts with conversation, intentional pauses during the day to check in with each other, and small acts of care like leaving notes or bringing tea to one another. Each gesture, no matter how minor, strengthened their trust and closeness. One evening, after tidying the kitchen together, Daniel took Emily's hand and held it gently. "I want to keep choosing you," he said, his voice firm but tender. Emily felt tears prick her eyes. "And I choose you too," she replied softly. In that moment, the distance that had felt so permanent disappeared. They weren't just coexisting, they were present with each other, rebuilding something deeper than before. Can emotional neglect be fully healed, or does it leave lasting scars? Though progress was being made, Emily remained aware that rebuilding trust and intimacy wasn't instantaneous. There would be challenges ahead, days when work pressures or distractions might tempt them back into old patterns. But now, they had awareness, communication, and a shared commitment. They had learned the importance of nurturing love deliberately, rather than assuming it would sustain itself. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, Emily noticed the transformation not just in Daniel but within herself. She laughed more freely, she spoke openly about her feelings, and she no longer felt trapped in silence. The warmth she had longed for was now a daily reality, built through intentional acts, shared experiences, and conscious care. Could this fragile reconnection survive future trials? The couple ended each day with small rituals, a hug before bed, a shared cup of tea, or a quiet conversation by the window. Emily realized that love wasn't about perfection or uninterrupted happiness. It was about presence, patience, and the willingness to choose each other, again and again. Margaret's gentle guidance had opened the door, but walking through it and sustaining what they had found was entirely up to them. That night, Emily lay in bed beside Daniel, feeling his warmth and the security of their rekindled connection. She thought about the months of loneliness, the ache of distance, and the way Margaret had stepped in, not to replace or control, but to remind them of what mattered most. The emotional storm that had once filled their home had passed, leaving space for trust, care, and shared intimacy to grow. Could love survive and even flourish after nearly being lost? Emily whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else, "We can do this. We will do this." Daniel reached for her hand and held it, squeezing gently. The quiet warmth between them was comforting, a promise that even after distance and neglect, love could be rekindled. They had found each other again, and with effort, laughter, and awareness, they could continue to build a life filled with connection, intimacy, and trust. The night was still, the apartment calm, but within the walls, love had returned, not perfect, but real, alive, and growing. Emily knew the final part of their journey would be about sustaining it, about learning to remain present even when life grew busy or challenges arose. They had taken the first crucial steps, and hope filled her heart. Can love survive when it has been nearly lost, and grow stronger than ever? The following days carried a quiet, steady rhythm. Emily and Daniel woke each morning with a small ritual: coffee together, smiles exchanged, a few minutes of conversation before work. These were simple acts, but for Emily, they were revolutionary. Months of emotional distance had left her longing for connection, and now every glance, every touch, every shared laugh felt intentional, meaningful, and full of warmth. She realized that love didn't require grand gestures, it required presence, attentiveness, and a willingness to choose each other each day. Margaret's influence had set the stage. Her subtle guidance, small acts of care, and gentle encouragement had reminded Emily that she deserved companionship, attention, and emotional closeness. But now, her mother-in-law's role was complete. She had stepped back, leaving Emily and Daniel to take responsibility for their own hearts. That in itself was empowering. Emily understood that the real work was theirs: sustaining connection, nurturing intimacy, and maintaining trust. Could they keep this newfound closeness alive without outside support? That weekend, Emily suggested a walk through a local park. Daniel agreed, and together they wandered through winding paths, observing trees just beginning to bud in early spring. They talked about their memories, their hopes, and even small frustrations. The conversation flowed naturally, without awkward pauses or resentment. Emily realized that months of silence hadn't erased their bond, they had only allowed it to fade. Now, it was coming back to life, quietly, deliberately, and beautifully. Returning home, they cooked dinner together. Emily noticed the laughter returning to their kitchen, the playful teasing, the small touches that had been missing. Daniel brushed a smudge of flour from her cheek, and Emily laughed, a sound she hadn't realized she had missed. The apartment felt lighter, warmer, not because of the temperature or lighting, but because love and attention filled every corner. Could emotional neglect ever truly be repaired? Emily thought about the months of loneliness she had endured, the ache that had gnawed at her heart, and the fear that her marriage might be over. She realized that emotional neglect doesn't leave visible scars, but it does leave memories, patterns, and doubts. The difference now was that they were aware, mindful, and willing to act differently. Every laugh, every conversation, every shared moment was like stitching a fabric of trust and intimacy that had frayed over time. One evening, as they sat by the window sharing tea, Daniel took Emily's hand gently. "I don't want to let us drift again," he said softly. Emily felt a lump in her throat. "Neither do I," she whispered. In that moment, they acknowledged the fragility of what they had rebuilt and the importance of guarding it with care, love, and intention. Could they trust themselves to remain present even when life grew busy again? The following week, Daniel surprised Emily with breakfast in bed, a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes. They laughed over spilled orange juice, shared a quiet morning together, and simply enjoyed each other's presence. Emily noticed that the small actions she and Daniel now took for granted were the very foundation of their renewed relationship. Attention, emotional honesty, and shared joy were far more valuable than perfection. Margaret visited once more, this time only briefly, to check in. Emily felt a sense of closure. The warmth she had received from her mother-in-law had been crucial, but it was no longer needed. The lessons had been internalized. Margaret smiled at them, seeing laughter and connection restored, and quietly left. Emily and Daniel were left alone, but not lonely. They had rebuilt their bond, stronger and more aware than before. Could a couple maintain intimacy and trust after drifting apart? Over the following days, Emily and Daniel established small routines that became habits: morning coffee together, evening walks, shared chores with playful teasing, and moments of vulnerability where they expressed fears and hopes. These small acts became the lifeblood of their emotional connection. Emily understood that love didn't survive on passion alone, it survived on attention, effort, and presence. Every choice to prioritize each other reinforced their bond. One evening, after a long day, Daniel pulled Emily into a quiet embrace. "We're here now," he said. "I see you, and I'm not letting go." Emily rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. The past months of loneliness, distance, and quiet ache felt like distant memories. They had navigated emotional storms, rediscovered each other, and rebuilt their marriage on a foundation stronger than before. Could love truly flourish after hardship? Spring slowly replaced the remnants of winter. Trees blossomed, sunlight spilled into their apartment, and life felt vibrant again. Emily and Daniel laughed more freely, shared more openly, and planned small joys together: a weekend trip, a visit to a cafe they loved, quiet evenings with music and conversation. Every shared experience was a reminder that connection was a choice, nurtured with patience, attention, and care. Emily reflected on how far they had come. Loneliness had seemed unbearable, emotional drift had seemed permanent, but with guidance, effort, and awareness, they had found warmth, safety, and love again. She understood that the journey was ongoing, but she felt confident in their ability to maintain the closeness they had rebuilt. Could they face future challenges without losing each other again? The answer was yes, she realized. They had learned to communicate, to notice the small gaps before they became chasms, to express love deliberately, and to prioritize emotional intimacy. The months of distance had been a wake-up call, a lesson in the fragility of connection and the importance of effort. But now, the lesson had been learned. Emily and Daniel were not just surviving, they were thriving. Together that night, as they lay side by side, Emily whispered softly, "We found each other again, and this time, we'll stay." Daniel held her hand tightly, squeezing gently. The apartment was calm, the city outside quiet, but inside their hearts, a warmth and security had returned. The storm of loneliness had passed, leaving a home filled with love, laughter, and mindful connection. Even when challenges return, they now knew how to face them. Together, Emily closed her eyes, feeling content, safe, and cherished. The months of struggle, the quiet heartache, and the subtle guidance from Margaret had all led them here. They had overcome emotional drift, rediscovered intimacy, and learned that love could be rebuilt, not magically, but with attention, care, and choice. Their story was a testament to resilience, awareness, and the power of emotional presence in sustaining a lifelong bond. For Emily and Daniel, the journey had been difficult, but it ended in warmth, closeness, and a love renewed, proving that even after drifting apart, hearts can find their way back to each other.